Today we're joined by the wonderful Namita Kumar, who I will just hand over to introduce their wonderful selves. So over to you, Namita. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Nice to be called wonderful. I'm not sure if it's strictly speaking true, but thank you for that. I'm a consultant physician and rheumatologist, but I spend most of my time being a postgraduate dean, which started off being looking after the training of postgraduate doctors, but actually England's deans in HEE are now responsible for the quality of learning for all clinical professions in the clinical environment. And I co-chair HEE's English Deans Committee, and I chair HEE Dean's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee.
Speaking from that wonderful background, what does disability inclusion mean for you?
So I started in education because of the injustices I saw that impacted my parents, and that was about race. It was the late 60s, early 70s, and it was about race. And I saw what happened to them. And then I saw what happened to my mum additionally due to gender. And I think these days we have a word for it, intersectionality. And we also have words for people who don't achieve as much as they're capable of. We call that differential attainment. But in those days, that just wasn't the case. And I absolutely believe that education is the key to most things, is unlocking the key to most things. So I got involved in medical education because I didn't want to perpetuate those injustices. I wanted to do my bit. I wanted to change the system. And as time's gone on, the issues that we've discussed, that we've focused on, have changed. Since then, sexuality, sexual orientation, those things have been far more visible. And mental health has become an issue more recently that people are prepared to engage and discuss with. So for me, it's been about, first of all, understanding that if you're in a minority of any type, how you acknowledge those characteristics that you might not have, but other people around you do. And as your own role changes, and in this position that I now find myself in, I'm in a much bigger position to influence, not in a way that I ever dreamed at the start that I could be. So you have to deal with the issues as they come to you, and you have to make sure that everybody's welcome and everybody's included.
You mentioned your role as part of the EDI committee.
So if I'm honest, it's new. We used Black Lives Matter as our platform to do something. We should have done it before. We should have formalized it before, but we've done it now. So we're very early on in our establishment. So what have we achieved so far? It's early days, but at least we have a structure, at least we have a process. And a lot of the time, it's for people in our position, it's about sifting and finding and learning about the issues that are impacting on students and learners, and then how we can use processes and governance to make things better. And if we can't use the current structures to do so, how do we change them? How do we change policy? How do we change regulation? So what we're very good at as English Deans is using policy, process and governance to get to the right outcome, and influencing when we need to.
I think that's probably quite confidence inspiring for many people listening, maybe, that it is new, but the goals are, if it's not working, we'll fix it. On that note, you've mentioned it already before, mental health and well-being has become a particular issue within higher education, but also within young people and the workplace, particularly in high stress environments, which, let's face it, the NHS and the medical professions are very high stress environments. How do you think we can best work towards supporting each other on that particular issue?
I think this is very complex. I think the impact of the internet, social media, your life can be invaded at all times of the day and night, and it's very difficult to step away. Whereas with going to work, you used to just be able to go to work and then you come away from work, or you go to school and you come away from school. But with with phones and with having to work from home because of COVID, all those boundaries have disappeared. And I think one of them, the first things we need to do is re-establish some of those boundaries, and that takes an awful lot of mental discipline. And if you're not feeling 100%, that's really hard to do, and you can get into a vicious cycle. The other thing that I do is appraisal for doctors throughout their careers, and you can see the burnout, you can see the triggers, you can see people who really genuinely wanted to do the right thing and the best thing for as many people as possible, just not able to give anymore. And I think there is something about how we plan careers, how we support through careers, not just for doctors, but for all people who work in the NHS. And that does mean things like effective line management, effective appraisal, effective career development, that does or doesn't happen dependent on where you might be. And one of the things that we should be able to do is have that that as systematic as possible. But you know, the NHS is an enormous beast. It's enormous, so that will be difficult. I think the other thing is the ability to talk about mental health issues. And you know, the question I will say to anyone who's listening: if your doctor started crying in clinic, how would you feel? And you don't have to answer that. And for some people, it will be, that's really good. They're human. They're doing what we all do. Or will you lose confidence in them because they've shown you their vulnerability when they were supposed to be looking after you? And I think that's where we find ourselves quite often as the medical profession, that if you give too much away, people will lose confidence in your ability to do the job. So obviously it's got to, if you do need support, it needs to be done in an appropriate way. And I think it's understanding what's appropriate. And it's not appropriate for everyone in the same place at the same time with the same people. But we do really need to make sure we've got a variety of things in place for people to be able to seek support. And the final thing I will say is we've had to work in many different ways because of COVID, but we're social animals. We need peer support, we need human contact, and we can't work from home for the rest of our lives. There needs to be a balance. And yes, we need to do that safely, we need to do it effectively, but we need to find a way of making sure that we enable social contact, particularly as the bulk of the NHS has gone in and done face-to-face work as it has to throughout the pandemic.
I think if I were to extract one thing from it, it's communicating, not just with each other, but with your colleagues, just having that conversation with someone, whether it is your line manager or a colleague, who will be able to support you in seeking the right thing for you, rather than that institutional one size fits all doesn't work. An additional thing I want to add before we move on to the next question is, as a disabled person, that question you asked, if I saw, when I go to my GP, when I go to my specialists, and I saw them break down or anything, I know that it would humanize you to me. And I think even if that worst case scenario does happen, 20% of us are disabled in society, and knowing that humanization would also be a little bit supportive for us as well, particularly when we struggle with our mental health. So it's reciprocal. We understand the stresses that you go through as doctors, and I think we'll all be supported there. As we've seen over the COVID pandemic, the NHS is very supported by everyone. On that note, talking to the people that are listening, primarily students entering that transition, but potentially they might already be in their rotational placements, or 30 years into their career and just picked up this resource. Mm-hmm. If you were to give one bit of advice, or one pointer for them to do tomorrow or to do at the weekend, from your perspective, and particularly this resource that is accompanying this, what would that be?
My advice would be to participate. And it's difficult. The system is difficult to navigate, whichever end you're coming at it. But certainly what I've seen in my experience is very angry, upset people, rightly so, but they've never engaged or they haven't told us. And I fully appreciate there may be a whole load of people who've tried, and I absolutely understand that the system is not always the most empathetic or sympathetic or indeed responsive, but we're trying our best to improve things, and we can't help if we don't know. And I think there is something about participating so that we all in society can hear what's going on, and then collectively we can try and find the solutions. It's a phrase that I learned not so long ago, and maybe I should have learned before now, is hard to reach. And no, I'm not hard to reach. You just haven't found me. And I think that is a really, really valid way of looking at it. But I know when I speak to my doctors and my learners that however I communicate with them, it's not the right way because they would prefer something else. But if you go in there with the mindset of there is someone there who's listening, I just have to find them, and I will find a way of communicating with you that's appropriate for you. We might be able to get something done.
Thank you so much for your time and your wonderful answers. As a final note, I'll just say, as part of this podcast series, this is accompanying our Find Your Way guide resource. So if you're sat there going, oh, well, I don't identify as disabled, or I don't think I'm disabled enough, these are common questions. Even I'm a wheelchair user, a full-time wheelchair user, and even I asked myself those questions when looking at the support available. So if you're sat there going, I'm facing an issue, a barrier, or I'm thinking I might need some support, whether that's screen reader, dictation software, anything like that, engage with the resource, apply for access to work. If you're still a student, apply for disabled students allowance, start the process, and that way you can get the support that allows you to be the productive as possible, but also achieve what you are entitled to achieve. So on that note, I'd like to close off today. Thank you so much, and check out the rest of the podcast series and the resource.